Welcome to Relative, our family mess. Here, I bring you the raw, unspoken stories of older men betrayed by the very families they spent a lifetime protecting, and the dark secrets hidden within the modern home. Now, here is today's story.
The woman sleeping beside me had a name for me when she thought I couldn't hear. The old man. Not Wyatt. Not husband. The old man. The way you'd talk about furniture you were waiting to throw out. I spent 40 years running a bank. I learned to read a balance sheet the way some men read scripture, to smell a lie before the ink was dry, to know exactly where the money went and who was lying about it. So when my own life started bleeding out around me, the dizziness, the missing thousands, the signatures I swore I never signed, some buried part of me understood long before my heart would say it out loud. My new wife was rehearsing my funeral. The man she called her son was helping her dig the grave. They thought a 66-year-old widower was the easiest mark in the world. Lonely, trusting, half asleep with grief. They forgot one thing. Before I was a lonely old man. I was the man who decided which lies got funded and which got buried. So I did what I had always done. I went quiet. I went slow. I let them believe I was already gone. And I started building the case that would bury them both. I'm truly glad you're here with me. Before we go on, drop a comment and tell me, have you ever sensed a betrayal in your own home long before you could prove it? And how did you carry it, or did everyone? A quick note before we begin. This is a work of fiction made for storytelling. The names and events are imagined, though the feelings may cut close to the bone. Now let me take you back to the morning it all started. It was the first Monday of November, a little after 7, and the cold coming off Lake Michigan climbed the bluff like it had a grudge against me. I have lived on this stretch of Door County for going on 30 years. The house is too big for one man. A long timber and stone thing that Marilyn and I built when the children were small, and the future still felt like something you could pour like a foundation. Marilyn has been gone 3 years. Some mornings, I still set out 2 cups before I remember. That morning, I carried my coffee down toward the dock to watch the gray water. The path slopes through the birches to a wooden staircase, 12 steps, and a landing that drops to the boards where my old boat is tied for the season. I built those steps the summer Otis turned 10, and have walked them 10,000 times with my eyes half closed. I was halfway down when the world tilted. It came without warning, the way a wave comes when your back is turned. 1 second, I was looking at the lighthouse past the point, and the next, the staircase swung sideways, the birches smearing into a blur, my heartbeat loud and wrong in my ears. My cup left my hand. I heard it shatter on the rocks below. My foot came down on a step that should have been solid, and the step was not there. And then I was falling. I grabbed for the railing on pure instinct and got 2 fingers around it. Then, a fist. My shoulder wrenching hard enough to white out my vision while my legs slid off the edge into open air. For a moment I hung there over a 10-foot drop onto wet limestone, an old man in a wool coat above the rocks that had just taken his coffee, and my grip was already failing. Then a hand closed around my wrist, strong, sure, certain. It was Ella Hayden, who has kept this house since before Marilyn got sick. She is past 70, small and weathered as a fence post, but there is iron in her, and she hauled until I got a knee onto the landing and pulled the rest of myself up. We sat on the cold boards, both of us breathing like we had run a mile. "You all right?" she finally said. I was watching from the kitchen window. "I saw you go." I told her I was fine. I was not fine. My shoulder was screaming. My pulse would not come down, and the cold sweat on me had nothing to do with November. but I have spent my whole life saying I am fine in rooms where men were losing fortunes. And the words came out smooth. It was the dizziness that bothered me, and not for the first time. For weeks it had come on at odd hours, a swimming lightness behind my eyes, a wrongness in my chest. The doctor had called it age, and stress, and grief, and I had believed him, because what else does a man believe? Ella did not look at me the way you look at someone who simply slipped. She looked at me the way you look at someone right before you tell them something you would rather not. Her mouth opened. Then she glanced up the path toward the warm yellow light in the kitchen window, where my wife was moving around. And whatever she meant to say folded back down inside her. "Be careful on these old steps," was all she said. I told her I would, and I might have left it there, written it off as a bad morning, if I had not looked down at the step that betrayed me. The fourth board from the top sat crooked, kicked half an inch out of true. I crouched, ignoring the protest in my shoulder, and ran my thumb along the edge where the board met the frame. The screws were backed out, not rusted, not rotted, not worked loose by 30 winters, backed out clean, their threads bright, as if someone had taken a driver to them in the last day or two and stopped just short of pulling them free. I knelt there with the lake breathing below me, and for the first time the math did not add up the way age and grief would have it. Steps do not loosen their own screws. I came up the path slower than I had gone down. A wiser man might have marched inside and held those bright screws under my wife's nose. But 40 years of watching people lie had taught me one thing. When you tip your hand, the lie only gets better. Show a man you suspect him, and he stops being careless. So I pressed the loose board back into place, brushed the dirt from my knees, and decided to say nothing. Not yet. Not until I understood what I was looking at. The kitchen windows glowed gold against the gray morning. Through the glass, it looked like a magazine spread, the kind of warm, easy scene a lonely man might trade his good sense to belong to, which, I was beginning to understand, was the point. Josephine met me at the door with a towel already in her hands. "There you are," she said, brushing a leaf from my shoulder. "You're chilled through. Sit. Let me make you something hot." She was 51 and looked younger, with dark hair worn loose and a way of touching your arm that made you feel like the only man in the room. I had married her 14 months ago, 3 years after I buried the only other woman I ever loved. My friends had called me lucky. My children had not smiled at all. I did not tell her about the fall, only that my coffee had slipped on the wet boards, which was true as far as it went. She clucked over me anyway, pressing a warm mug into my hands, her concern as practiced as a hostess pouring wine. Once that gentleness had felt like rescue. This morning I found myself watching her hands. Beckham was at the counter slicing fruit. He was her son from a marriage she rarely spoke of, somewhere in his early 30s, with good shoulders and a salesman's easy grin. He had appeared not long after the wedding, always helpful, fixing gutters, driving me to appointments, running the small machinery of an old man's days. Morning. "Wyatt," he said, "you look pale." Big night, I told him I slept fine. He laughed as though I had said something clever and slid the bowl in front of me. Josephine set my pills beside the plate the way she did every morning. 2 for the heart, 1 for the blood pressure, a white capsule the doctor had added in spring. She filled my water glass and watched, kindly, until I swallowed each one. A man does not think twice about the wife who hands him his medicine. That is the whole cruel beauty of it. The phone rang while I was eating. Otis. I carried it into the hall out of habit. A man who did not want his children's voices and his new wife's hearing in the same room. My son did not bother with hello. "Dad, did you sign anything this week? Anything she put in front of you?" I asked him what kind of greeting that was. "I'm serious." He said, "Thea and I have been talking. The accounts. Dad, things are moving. We can see it. That woman did not come into your life for your company." Something old and tired rose up in me. We had been over this ground 100 times, always ending the same place. I told him what I always told him, that he was 38 and still keeping score over his mother, that Josephine made me happy, that I would not apologize for not wanting to die alone in a house full of her things. There was a long silence. When Otis spoke again, his voice had gone quiet, and that was worse than shouting. "I'm not keeping score," he said. "I'm scared. There's a difference. And someday, you're going to see it. I just hope you see it in time." He hung up. I stood in the cold hall holding the dead phone, my chest tight in a way I told myself was anger. When I came back, the kitchen had gone strange. Josephine and Beckham stood close by the far counter, heads bent together, her hand flat against his chest, his mouth at her ear. It was nothing. A mother and a grown son sharing a word. And yet something in the set of them snagged on me, the way a single figure in a ledger catches your eye before you know why. They were too close. They were too still. Then Beckham saw me in the doorway, and the two of them came apart, smooth as water. And Josephine turned with a bright smile, asking if Otis sent his love. I said that he did, the second lie of the morning, and it was not yet 9. I sat back down to my cooling breakfast, and that was when the floor began to move. It came on the same as it had on the dock, a swimming lightness behind the eyes, the room tilting half a degree off its hinges. My heart loud and uneven. I gripped the table. Across the kitchen, Josephine watched me, head cocked, her face all soft concern. And for one disordered moment, I could not tell whether I was looking at worry or at something studying its own work. The wave passed. I said it was nothing, just standing too fast. And she believed me, or pretended to. That night, I could not sleep. Long after Josephine's breathing had gone slow and even, I rose and went down to the dark kitchen and took my heart pills from the cabinet where she kept them. I shook one into my palm and held it under the light over the stove. I had taken that same pill twice a day for 6 years. I knew its color, its shape, the small letters pressed into one face. The tablet in my hand was almost right. Almost. A shade too pale. The edge a hair too sharp. I stood a long time, an old banker squinting at a single pill, the way I had once squinted at numbers that did not belong. Then I wrapped it in tissue, slid it into the pocket of my robe, and went upstairs to lie awake beside my wife. For 40 years I read balance sheets the way a doctor reads an X-ray, finding the break before the patient felt the pain. A number out of place has a smell to it, faint and particular. And that morning, in my study with the lake gone steel gray behind the glass, my own account smelled like something 3 days dead. I had not gone looking for trouble. I had gone looking for comfort. I told myself the pill was nothing, a bad batch, an old man's eyes playing tricks under a dim light. So I did what I've always done when the world stops adding up. I opened the books. My affairs were never complicated. A careful man with a long career leaves a tidy estate. The brokerage account, the trust Marilyn and I built, 2 bank accounts, and the bonds I had laddered since before Otis could walk. I knew the shape of all of it the way you know the weight of your own hand. I had built my life on the faith that money tells the truth, even when people do not. I logged into the brokerage first. The balance was lower than it should have been. Not alarmingly. A man my age expects to draw down. but I have never in my life been off by $1 in my head. And the figure on the screen was off by a good deal more. I pulled the history and went back through the autumn, line by line, the way I once walked junior analysts through a loan file until they wanted to weep. There, the 4th of October, a transfer of $38,000 to an account I did not recognize, routed through a holding company whose name meant nothing. I sat back. I am not a man who forgets $38,000. Yet there it was under my own login, my own authorization, as if I had reached out one bright fall morning and handed a stranger the price of a new truck. I opened the drawer where Josephine filed our paperwork and found the form. It was a standard authorization, the kind I had signed 10,000 times. At the bottom, in blue ink, was my signature. It was mine. The loop of the Y, the hard downstroke I have made since I was a boy. But I didn't remember signing it. And a careful man remembers his own name on a page that moves $38,000. I closed my eyes and tried to find the day. And slowly, like something surfacing from deep water, it came to me. I had been ill that week, one of the bad spells, worse than most. Josephine at my elbow with a stack of papers and her soft voice saying, "Just here, darling, and here, the household things. You needn't read every line. You're not well." And I, foggy and grateful and ashamed of my own weakness, had signed where she pointed. A cold quiet settled over me, the kind I used to feel in a boardroom the instant before I understood I was being robbed. Josephine came in then with coffee, as if the house had cued her. She set the cup at my elbow and looked at the screen, at the columns of figures, and her face did something small and quick before it smoothed. "Working too hard again," she said lightly. "You promised me you'd let all this go." I smiled and told her I was only tidying up. Then, because a banker learns to ask the dangerous question while looking at his coffee, I asked how long she had lived in Milwaukee before we met. Just talking. Just remembering. "Oh, years," she said. "I came down from Green Bay after the divorce. 2017. I nodded and let it pass. But the part of me that never sleeps, that has filed away 40 years of figures, turned the date over and found a burr on it. Months ago, she had told me about a hard winter in Milwaukee, pipes freezing in a rental on the south side, the year the big storm closed the airport. That storm was 2014. I remembered, because I had been snowed in at a conference and missed Marilyn's birthday. 2014. 2017. A small thing. People misremember years all the time. But I do not. And the woman in my bed was not supposed to misplace 3 of them. She kissed the top of my head and went out, and I listened to her footsteps cross the hall. Then I got to work in earnest. I took a yellow pad from the drawer and did the only thing I have ever truly known how to do. I built a record. Down one side, I wrote every day. In the past 2 months, I could remember being unwell, the dizziness, the fog, the strange, heavy sleep. Down the other. Every transaction I could not account for. Every transfer. Every form. Every withdrawal. Then I drew the lines between them. They matched. Not most of them. All of them. Every dollar that had walked out of my life had walked out on a day when I could barely walk myself. The fog and the money moved together, in step, like 2 dancers who had rehearsed. I have spent my whole life proving that coincidence is just a pattern a lazy man refuses to see. I looked at that pad a long time, my coffee going cold, and understood that I was not losing my mind. Someone was taking it from me a spoonful at a time, and emptying my accounts while my back was turned. I also understood something colder. The evidence on that pad lived in a house that was no longer mine. The accounts ran through her hands. The papers sat in her drawer. The pills came from her fingers. If I was going to prove any of it, I could not prove it here, where every file and every locked thing answered to the two people I now had to fear. I tore the page free, folded it small, and put it in my pocket beside the pill. I needed help, and I needed it where they could not see. I had spent a career proving where vanished money went. Now the thing vanishing was me, and I meant to find out where I was going. I could not ask anyone in our town. In a place this small, a banker is a public figure for life, and he cannot walk into the corner pharmacy and ask whether his own heart pills are trying to kill him without it reaching his wife by supper. So the next morning, when Josephine believed I was driving to the hardware store, I drove the other way. 40 minutes down the peninsula to a drugstore in a town where the name Brewer meant nothing. The young woman behind the counter had a kind, unhurried face. I told her a half-truth, that I had been sorting a relative's medicines and gotten the bottles confused, and worried an old man might be taking the wrong thing by mistake. Could she tell me what this one was? I set the pill on the counter in its tissue, as if it were a splinter of glass. She picked it up, turned it under the light, and typed the markings into her computer. I watched her face. I have watched 1,000 faces across a desk, waiting for the number that changes everything. And I knew the exact moment she found it. "This isn't a heart medication," she said slowly. "The imprint. This is something else. This lowers blood pressure, and it's a fairly strong one." She looked up at me. For a person with a weak heart, taking this in place of their real medicine, that could be very dangerous. The dizziness, the fainting. You'd want to get that sorted right away. I thanked her, left a tip in the jar by the register that made her laugh, and walked out into the gray morning. I sat in my truck a long while without starting it. There it was, the number that changes everything. For weeks I had been swallowing a stranger's medicine from my own wife's hand, a pill chosen to drop the pressure in an old man's veins until his heart stumbled and his head swam, and he could not read a single line on a single page. The fall on the dock had not been bad luck. The fog had not been age. The forgotten signature had not been a slip. They were all one thing, and I had been too proud and too lonely to see it. I drove home with my hand steady on the wheel and my mind running the way it used to run in the worst hours of my career, when a deal was collapsing and $100 million hung on whether I could think clearly while everyone around me panicked. I did not panic. I built the case, back in the study, with the door shut. I laid it all out on the yellow pad, not the symptoms now, the strategy, because a scheme this patient is not random. It has a shape, and a shape tells you what the builder is trying to make. I saw 2 roads, and both of them ended with me gone. The first road was the simple one. The pill. Keep dropping the pressure. Keep stressing the heart. And one ordinary morning, a 66-year-old man with a known cardiac condition simply doesn't wake up. The doctor signs the certificate without a second thought. The grieving young widow inherits a fortune and a lakefront house, and no one ever looks twice, because old hearts stop every day. The second road was colder, and in some ways crueler. The fog, the missing money, the signatures pulled from a confused man's hand. That road wasn't building a death, it was building a record, a paper trail of a declining mind. A man who signs things he forgets, who loses thousands and cannot say where, who grows dizzy and unreliable. Build that trail high enough, and you do not need him to die at all. You go to a court with a doctor and a stack of documents, and you have him declared incompetent. You take control of the accounts, The house, the trust, all of it, while the old man sits drugged and bewildered in a back room, alive and erased. They were running both roads at once, hedging, whichever crossed the finish line first. I had spent 40 years on the other side of that table, the side that catches the fraud, that smells the forged ledger, that stops the clever man before he walks out the door with what is not his. I knew this play. I had broken men who ran cleaner versions of it. And now it was being run on me, in my own home, in my own bed, by a woman who handed me my medicine with a smile and called me darling. The rage came then, real and physical, a heat behind my eyes and a tightness in my fists. For one wild minute, I wanted to walk into the kitchen and put the truth between us like a knife on the table and watch her face break. And that, I knew, would be the end of me. The instant they understood I had seen them, the slow road would end, and the fast one would begin in earnest. A man who knows too much has accidents. A man who knows too much falls down stairs that are not even loose. My only protection, the only thing keeping me alive, was their belief that I was exactly what they took me for. A trusting old fool, fading quietly, signing where he was told. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I decided to keep being that fool. I would tremble when they expected trembling. I would forget when forgetting kept me safe. I would take their pills in front of them and grow vague and grateful and old. And I would let them believe the slow road was working. And in the dark, where they could not see, I would build the case that buried them both. I picked up the phone and dialed the one man left in the world I trusted completely. A first move against people like this needs a man you can trust without a second thought. And at 66, I could count those men on one hand, with fingers to spare. Barrett Anderson was the first name on that short list. I had hired him out of a state college 30 years ago, a serious young man with bad shoes and a better mind than anyone in the room. And I had watched him grow into the finest forensic banker I ever trained. When the auditors could not find the hole in a book, I sent Barrett, and Barrett found it. He had run my compliance desk for a dozen years. He owed me his career. He would tell you. Though the truth is, I owed him mine 100 times over. He had retired to a tidy house in Sturgeon Bay, and a boat he never sailed. When I called and said I needed him, no questions, no wife of mine to know. He said only, where and when. We met 2 days later at a coffee shop near the shipyards, the kind of place where the booths are deep and the regulars mind their own business. Barrett looked older than I remembered, grayer, but his eyes were the same, quick and patient at once. I told him most of it. Not the pill. Not yet. I am not sure why I held that back, except that saying it out loud to another living soul would make it true in a way I was not ready for. But I told him about the money, the transfers, the signature I did not remember, the dates that lined up with the days I could barely think. I slid the folded yellow page across the table. He read it the way he read everything. Slowly, his lips not moving, his whole face going still. When he looked up, the warmth had gone out of him, replaced by something harder. "Wyatt," he said quietly. "This rooting here, through this holding company. This is not a wife skimming the grocery money. This is structured. Somebody built these layers on purpose to make the money hard to follow." He tapped the page. People do this when they have done it before. I asked him if he could trace it without a footprint, without anyone knowing I was looking. "Give me a week," he said. "I still have friends who owe me. But Wyatt," he hesitated, and Barrett never hesitated. "Be careful in that house. Whoever set this up is not an amateur." Driving home. I let myself remember how she had come into my life, because I needed to look at it now with clear eyes instead of a lonely man's. It had been a hospital charity dinner, a little over 2 years ago, in the same ballroom where Marilyn had once chaired the committee. I had not wanted to go. I went because the bank had bought a table, and a widower has to start somewhere. I was out on the terrace escaping the noise when a woman in dark blue appeared at the rail beside me and said, "You're Wyatt Brewer, aren't you?" She said it like a gift, like she had been hoping all night I might be there. She knew things. She knew I had run the bank, knew the building downtown, mentioned a late husband who had admired me from a distance, a man whose name I never quite caught and never thought to ask. At the time, it felt like fate, like the universe handing a drowning man a rope. She listened the way no one had listened since Marilyn. By the end of the evening, I felt seen for the first time in a year. Now, with cold eyes, I saw it differently. She had known exactly who I was before I said a word. She had known where the lonely rich widower would be that night, and she had walked straight to him. A man does not stumble into prey that perfect. A man hunts it. I put that thought away and built my face back into the trusting old fool before I turned up my own drive. That evening, I set the first small test. We were at supper, the three of us, the candles lit, Josephine asking after my day in that warm, attentive way. I let my shoulders sag. I told them I was tired of it all, the accounts, the paperwork, the endless decisions a man my age should not have to make alone anymore. Maybe it was time, I said, to simplify things, to hand more of it over to people I trusted, to stop worrying. The change in the room was immediate, and to a man who had spent his life reading the faces of people who wanted his money, it was as loud as a shout. Josephine set down her fork. Her eyes brightened, just slightly, the way a card player's do when the right card falls. That's so wise. "Darling," she said, leaning in, "you've carried it all so long. We could sit down this week, get everything organized. Just sign a few things over so it's off your shoulders." Beckham was nodding before she finished. "I can drive you to the lawyer myself. Wyatt, whenever you're ready. No trouble at all." They were too quick, too eager. Two hawks who had just watched the field mouse offer to walk into the trap and could barely hide their hunger. I let them talk, let them paint the picture of how simple it could all be, and I nodded along, vague and grateful, the perfect fool warming to their plan. "Soon," I told them, "after the holidays," and I watched the small flicker of impatience cross Josephine's lovely face, quickly hidden, before she smiled and refilled my water. That night, my phone lit up on the nightstand. A message from Barrett, sent late. The way men our age send messages when they cannot sleep. The transfers are real. It read, "Routed through 3 shells in 2 states. Whoever did this has done it before, and done it clean. Wyatt, I am telling you as a friend. Someone in your life knows exactly how to hide money. Watch your back. If they were professionals, then I needed a professional of my own. Barrett could follow money the way a hound follows a scent, but money was only half of it. I needed someone who worked people, who could take a name and a face and peel back the years to find what lay underneath. When I called him about it, Barrett did not even pause. There's a young investigator down in Green Bay. He said, Amy Webb. Used to work fraud for an insurance company before she went out on her own. She is the best I have seen at finding the person somebody used to be. Tell her I sent you. Her office was a single room above a hardware store, with a window that looked out on a parking lot and a desk that held exactly 1 pen, 1 laptop, and 1 cold cup of coffee. Amy Webb was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with short dark hair and the flat, unbothered stare of someone who had heard every kind of lie and stopped being surprised by any of them. She did not stand when I came in. She just pointed at the chair. "Barrett says you're worth the trip," she said. "He doesn't say that about people. So tell me what's wrong. And tell me the version where you don't leave things out to protect your pride. I get paid more when you don't waste my time." I liked her at once. I told her about Josephine, the marriage, the money, the dates that did not fit. I told her about the storm in Milwaukee that happened in the wrong year. And then, because she had asked for the whole version, I told her about the dizziness and the pill. The one thing I had not been able to say even to Barrett. She did not gasp. She wrote it down in a small notebook, in handwriting too neat for the things it was recording. Then I told her about Beckham, her son, always around, always helpful, driving me to my appointments, fixing things that did not need fixing. Amy's pen stopped. "How old is she?" she asked. "And how old is he?" 51, I said. "He's somewhere in his early 30s. She looked at me for a moment, then made a note and underlined it twice. "Tell me about the two of them together," she said. "Not what they say they are. What you see," so I told her. The way they bent their heads together and went quiet when I came in. The way she touched his arm. The way the warmth between them never quite sat right. Like a coat that fit the shoulders, but pulled at the seams. I had told myself 100 times it was nothing. A close mother and a grown son. Saying it out loud to a stranger. I heard for the first time how thin that story was. Amy did not tell me what she thought. That I would learn was her way. She gathered, she sorted, and she did not hand you a conclusion until it was carved in stone. But she wrote for a long time after I stopped talking, and when she finally looked up, she said only, "I'll start with her. People like this always have a before. We just have to find it." She named her fee. I paid it on the spot, the way I had paid for everything in this fight, because money was the one weapon they had not yet taken from me. As I stood to leave, she added, "One more thing. Don't change anything at home. Don't get brave. Whatever you do, keep being the man they think you are. The day they figure out you know is the day you stop being safe." She was the second person to tell me that in a week. I was beginning to understand. It was the only rule that mattered. That night, I set the second test. And this one, I aimed at a different nerve. Over supper, I mentioned, idly, between bites, that I had been thinking about the will, that I felt I had been unfair to my children, that I wanted to call my attorney and put things right with Thea and Otis before the new year. If the first test had made them hungry, this one made them afraid. Josephine went very still. The fork paused halfway to her mouth and hung there a beat too long. Across the table, Beckham's jaw tightened, and his eyes flicked to hers. Fast, asking a question. The temperature in that warm, bright kitchen dropped 10 degrees. "Of course, darling," Josephine said, and her voice was smooth, but it came a half-second too late. "Though you know how those two have treated you, I'd hate to see you upset yourself over people who only call when they want something. Maybe wait until you're feeling stronger before you make any big changes. Wait until I'm feeling stronger. Until the pill had done a little more work. Until the fog had thickened. They did not want me near a lawyer with a clear head and a generous heart. The current will, whatever it said, served them. And the thought of me changing it had put real fear in their eyes for the first time. Maybe you're right, I said. Sagging. Vague. Retreating. I'm tired. We'll talk about it after the holidays. And I watched the relief move through both of them, like a tide going out. 2 mornings later, my phone buzzed while I was pretending to nap in the study. Amy Webb. I've started pulling your wife apart," she said. "No greeting. All business. And Mr. Brewer, I have to tell you, it's strange. Josephine Chase has a clean, ordinary paper trail, driver's license, lease, bank account, all of it. The problem is none of it goes back more than about 6 years. Before that, this woman doesn't exist. No history, no records, nothing. It's like she was born at 50. She let that sit a moment. So here's the real question. She said, the one we have to answer. Before she was Josephine Chase, who was she? Knowing who my wife used to be could wait. Knowing what was in my blood could not. Because that question had a clock on it. And the clock was my own heart. I could not go to my own doctor. He had spent 6 months patting my hand and calling my symptoms age. And for all I knew, he got half his information from Josephine in the waiting room. I needed someone who answered to no one but the truth. His name was Noah Liu. I knew him through the hospital foundation, where I had given money for 20 years, and Marilyn had given her time. He was a clinical toxicologist in his 40s, a quiet, exact man who studied poisons for a living, and had the calm of someone who is rarely the most frightened person in the room. I asked him to meet me after hours, and when I told him why, his face changed, and he did not argue. He drew my blood himself in a small lab that smelled of antiseptic and cold metal. I handed him the pill in its tissue, and a second I had palmed from the bottle that morning, swapping in a vitamin so the count would stay right. I had learned to think like them now. Sleight of hand at my own breakfast table. Noah turned the pills under a lens. "I won't guess," he said. "Guessing kills people in my line of work. Give me a few days and I'll tell you exactly what's been going into you." Then, after a pause, he added quietly, "You were right to come. Whatever this is, you did not imagine it. Men do not invent the kind of fear I'm seeing on your face. I drove home in the early dark, the headlights swallowing the empty road, and I felt something I had not felt in weeks. Not hope, exactly. The grim steadiness of a man who has finally stopped wondering whether he is crazy. That feeling lasted until I reached my own driveway. Josephine's car was there, and Beckham's. But the house windows were dark. A light burned down by the water, in the old boathouse where I kept the canoe and the lake gear. I left the truck up by the garage and went down the slope on foot. Quiet, out of an instinct I no longer questioned. And the closer I got, the more I could hear 2 voices through the gap in the boathouse door. I stopped in the shadow of the birches and listened. They had no reason to lower their voices, and so they did not. Not entirely. I could not catch every word over the water lapping at the pilings. But I caught the shape of it. And the shape was wrong. There was a softness in the way she said his name that no mother uses. A laugh. Low and private. And then, clear across the dark, Beckham's voice, half teasing, half something else, saying, "You worry too much. We've done this before. We just have to be patient a little longer. We've done this before." Then her voice, lower, and the words were lost. But the tone was not. It was not the tone a woman takes with her son. I had been married twice. I knew that tone. It was the tone you take with the person you share a bed with. A cold weight settled in my chest, and some part of me that had refused to look finally turned and looked. I did not let myself finish the thought. I had no proof, and a banker does not act on what he feels in his gut until the ledger confirms it. So I folded it down, the way Ella had folded down whatever she meant to tell me on the dock, climbed back up the slope, let myself in the front door, and called out in my warmest, vaguest old man's voice, "Anybody home?" They came up from the boathouse a few minutes later. Josephine first, then Beckham, both of them smiling. both of them carrying nothing, with no reason in the world to have been standing in a cold boathouse in the dark. "Just checking the canoe was tied down before the storm," Josephine said brightly, and kissed my cheek, and I said how thoughtful. And we all went in to supper and lied to each other over the chicken. 3 days later, Noah called. I was in the study with the door shut. I answered on the first ring. "Mr. Brewer," he said, and there was no warmth in his voice now, only the careful flatness of a man delivering very bad news. I ran everything twice. "The pill is exactly what your pharmacist told you, a blood pressure medication, not your heart drug. But the blood is worse. There's a substance in your bloodstream that has no business being in any human body. Low concentration, the kind of thing that builds up slowly, over weeks, until one day the heart or the kidneys simply give out, and everyone calls it natural." I gripped the edge of the desk. "And here is what you need to understand," he went on. "The level in your blood is higher than those pills alone could explain, which means it isn't only the pills. Someone is also putting this into your food, or your drink. More than one way in. That is not an accident. Mr. Brewer. And it is not carelessness. It is a method." The room was very quiet. Out the window, the lake was the color of slate. "I'm going to say the word," Noah said, "because you need to hear it said plainly. And then you need to decide what you are going to do. You are being poisoned. Slowly, carefully, by someone close enough to fill your plate. And whoever it is has been doing it long enough to know exactly how much to give you." The clock I had been hearing for weeks, faint and formless, finally took on a number. It was counting down to my own funeral, and I had no idea how many days were left on it. A man who has just learned how he is going to die does not sleep. That night, with Josephine breathing slow and even beside me, I rose in the dark and went looking for the only person who had ever made this house a home. At the end of the upstairs hall is a room I have not changed in 3 years. It was Marilyn's, her sewing and her reading and her quiet, with a window seat that looks out over the water. Josephine had asked, gently, more than once, whether we might clear it out and make it something new. I had always said not yet. Now I closed the door, turned on the small lamp, and let the room hold me the way it used to hold her. Her things were still where she left them. A half-finished quilt folded over the chair, her reading glasses on the sill, the books she never got to finish, marked at the page where she stopped. I sat in her window seat and took down the album from the low shelf, the fat one with the cracked green spine, and opened a life. There she was, Marilyn at 24, the summer I met her, laughing at something off the edge of the picture. We met at a bank picnic, of all the ordinary places, and I knew, before the afternoon was out, that I would spend my life trying to be the man she already thought I was. We married young. We were poor for a while, then less poor, then comfortable, and through all of it, she was the steady hand on the small of my back. I turned the pages. Thea as a baby, red-faced and furious. Otis at 6, missing his front teeth, holding up a fish half his size. The day we broke ground on this house, the 4 of us in hard hats. Marilyn just full of the future. She chaired the hospital committee, ran the church suppers, knew every neighbor's name and trouble. She was the warm center, and I was content to be the quiet man beside the fire. Then the last pages, the ones I did not look at often. Marilyn thin and pale but still smiling, a scarf where her hair had been. The illness took 2 years, slow and merciless, and I held her hand through every hour of it. At the very end, she was lighter than the quilt across her knees, and she squeezed my fingers and told me she was not afraid. And I lied and said I would be all right. I wasn't all right. The silence after she went was a thing with weight. I would come home to a dark house and stand in the front hall, and the quiet would press on me until I could not breathe. I stopped eating proper meals. I stopped answering the phone. A year of that emptiness hollows a man out, and a hollow man will reach for anything warm. That was the truth I had been hiding from. Josephine had not tricked a wise man. She had found a lonely one, scooped out by grief, desperate to feel chosen again. She gave me a reason to come downstairs in the morning, and I was so grateful for the warmth that I never stopped to ask why it had come looking for me. My children saw it the first night I brought her to dinner, the way Thea's smile froze and Otis went silent. They saw the hunger under the charm, while I saw only a second chance. And how had I thanked them for seeing clearly? I had called them jealous. At my wedding to Josephine, Thea had pulled me aside with tears in her eyes and begged me to wait. Just wait. Just a year. And I had told her she was dishonoring her mother's memory by not wanting me happy. She had not spoken to me since, except for those frightened phone calls I kept brushing off. Otis had come to the wedding and left before the cake, and I had let him go. Too proud to chase my own son down the driveway, I had pushed away the two people on this earth who loved me without wanting a single thing from me, and I had pulled close the two who wanted everything. It was then, reaching to put the album back, that my hand found the envelope. It had slipped down behind the books, a plain cream envelope gone soft at the edges. And on the front, in Marilyn's hand, the careful schoolteacher script I would know anywhere was my name. Just my name. Wyatt. She had written it in those last weeks. I was sure of it, and tucked it here for me to find. And in 3 years of not changing this room, I had never found it. My hand started to shake. I turned it over. It was still sealed. I do not know how long I sat there holding my dead wife's last letter, unable to open it. Part of me was afraid of what she had written. A larger part was afraid that once I read her final words, she would be truly and finally gone. The last of her spent, and I wasn't ready. Not with so much darkness still ahead of me, so I did something I cannot fully explain. I pressed the envelope to my chest for a moment, and then I slid it carefully into the breast pocket of my robe, next to my heart, unopened. I would read it when this was over, when I had earned the right, when I could face her words as a man who had set things right, not a fool still tangled in his own ruin. I turned off the lamp, and as I stood in the dark of Marilyn's room, one thing had become clear and certain in me. Clear as a figure that finally balances at the bottom of a long, hard column. I had to find my way back to my children. Tomorrow. Before it was too late, if it was not too late already. The only question left was whether, after everything, I still remembered how to trust anyone at all. I had called my children jealous. Now I had to call one of them to say I was sorry, and admit I was afraid. The next morning I drove into town, away from the house and its listening walls, and called Otis from the grocery store lot. My hand's not quite steady. He let it ring 4 times. I thought he might not answer. "Dad," he said finally, wary, flat. "Is something wrong?" I told him I wanted to see him, just the two of us, that I had things to say I should have said a year ago. There was a long silence, the kind I deserved. And then he said he could meet me Thursday at the tavern on the Bay Road. "Not the house," I said. Not the house. I understood why better than he knew. Otis was 38, a builder who worked with his hands the way I never had. It had been a quiet sorrow between us for years, that I had wanted a son in a suit and gotten a son in sawdust, and had not hidden my disappointment well. I was ashamed of that now. He was already in a back booth, broad-shouldered, his mother's dark eyes, a coffee going cold in front of him. He did not stand. He watched me lower myself into the seat across from him, taking in how I looked. Thinner, grayer, older than 2 years should have made me. "You look terrible," he said. And it was not an insult, but almost fear. "I have not been well." I said, "And before that, I owe you something. I was wrong. Otis. About Josephine. About everything you and your sister tried to tell me. I called you jealous because the truth was too humiliating to hold. You were right. I am sorry." I watched the words land. His jaw worked. He looked away at the gray water, and when he looked back, his eyes were wet and angry at once. "Do you know what it was like?" he said. "Low and rough. To watch her move in and watch you go dim and have you tell us we were the problem. We lost Mom. Then we lost you to that woman, and you blamed us for trying to hold on." "I know," I said. "I know. There is no excuse. There is only that I see it now." Something in him cracked, the long-held anger giving way to the boy underneath, and he scrubbed a hand across his face. Then he said, quieter, "What do you mean you haven't been well?" This was the moment I had turned over 100 times. Part of me wanted to tell him everything. The pill, the poison, the clock. But I looked at his frightened face and could not put that weight on him yet. If he knew, he would storm up to that house tonight. And the day they knew, I knew was the day I died. So I gave him a piece of the truth and held the rest. "She has been taking money," I said. "A great deal of it. Moved where it is hard to follow. I have good people looking quietly, and I am closer than she thinks. But you have to trust me and keep this between us. Not a word to her. If she suspects I am awake, everything falls apart. Can you give me that?" He looked at me a long time, then reached across and put his rough hand over mine. The first time my son had touched me in 2 years. "Okay, Dad," he said. "Whatever you need. But I'm in this now. You don't push me out again." I drove home with my chest aching in a way that, for once, had nothing to do with my heart. I had my son back. That feeling did not survive the front door. Josephine was waiting in the kitchen, the warmth a half-degree too bright, the smile too tight. "How was your drive, darling?" she said, setting down a cup of tea I would not be drinking. "You were gone a while, all the way out to the Bay Road," I heard. The Bay Road. She knew exactly where I had been, which meant Beckham had followed me or she was watching the truck somehow, and either way the cage had just gotten smaller. I kept my face vague. Just needed a drive. I said, cleared my head. She came around the counter, took a document from a folder in the drawer, and laid it before me with a pen on top. Gentle as anything. "I've been so worried about you," she said, smoothing my hair. "These spells, the falls. I talked to a lawyer, and he said, the loving thing is for you to give me authority to act for you. Your health, your accounts, all of it, in case you can't. So you never have to worry again. Just sign here. Darling, and let me carry it for you. A durable power of attorney. The legal key to everything I owned, sliding across my own kitchen table on a tide of tenderness. I picked up the pen and let my hand shake the way they expected. I held the page close, then far, and let my eyes go watery and lost. I can't make out the words today. "Sweetheart," I said, in the befuddled voice of the man they thought I was. "My head's no good. Leave it with me and I'll sign on a better day." I gave her the helpless smile of a fool who only wanted taking care of. and set the pen beside the unsigned page. For one bright instant, something hard and furious flickered behind her eyes. Then it was gone, and she said, "Of course, darling. No rush," and slid the folder away. But I had seen it, and I understood. They were not waiting for the holidays anymore. They were reaching for the legal key now, in broad daylight, which meant the slow road and the fast road had merged into one and ran straight downhill. Whatever weeks Noah thought I had, I no longer believed I could count on them. The clock in my chest was racing toward a finish line I could not see. The call came at 12 minutes past 2 in the morning. I had not been sleeping. I rarely slept now, lying still in the dark beside Josephine, matching my breathing to hers, pretending to be unconscious next to the woman I no longer dared turn my back on. When the phone lit the ceiling, I had it in my hand before the second buzz. Amy Webb did not call at 2 in the morning to pass the time. I slipped out of bed, crossed the hall to Marilyn's room, and shut the door before I answered. My voice barely a breath. "Mr. Brewer," Amy said, and I could hear it in her. The flat calm gone thin over something underneath. I found her before. I found who she was. And I need you to sit down, because this is not what we thought. It is worse. I sat on the window seat in the dark. "Tell me," I said. 6 years ago, before Josephine Chase existed, there was a woman married to a man named Lorenzo Bruce. Wealthy. Older. A retired developer in Illinois. No children living. A big house and a bigger bank account. She came into his life late. The way she came into yours, and married him fast. The way she married you. 18 months after the wedding, Lorenzo Bruce died. Heart failure. He was 68. The number went through me like cold water. 68. I was 66. There was no autopsy. Amy went on. The death looked natural. The doctor signed it, and the body was cremated within the week. Her idea, the records say. Then she inherited everything, sold the house, liquidated the accounts, and disappeared. No forwarding address. The widow Bruce walked off the edge of the world, and a few years later, with a clean new paper trail and a new name. Josephine Chase walked into a hospital charity dinner in Door County and found you. I sat very still. Out the window, the lake was black and bottomless under a sky with no moon. Heart failure. I said. My own voice sounded strange to me. He had a weak heart at the end. Dizzy spells. Forgetfulness. A decline that made perfect sense to everyone who watched it happen. I don't have his medical records, Amy said quietly. But you don't need them, do you? You already know exactly what his last year looked like, because you are living it. There it was, the pattern I had refused to imagine, laid out clean and terrible. The pills, the fog, the patient gentle poisoning of an older man with money and no one close enough to ask questions. The natural death, the quick cremation that left nothing to test, the inheritance, the vanishing. She had built it once, perfected it, walked away clean. And now she was running the same machine on me, step for step. With 18 months on the clock, and most of them gone. I was not her first husband. I was her second project. Lorenzo Bruce was the rehearsal. I was the performance. And there's one more thing, Amy said. And now even she sounded shaken. Women who do this cleanly, this patiently, almost never work alone. The forged papers, the layered accounts, the staging. It takes more than one set of hands. Somewhere in the Lorenzo Bruce file, there are traces of a second person helping her. I can't put a face on it yet. But Mr. Brewer, You already have a man in your house who is always there, always helpful, always close. I think you need to ask yourself who Beckham really is. The cold weight I had felt in the boathouse came back, heavier now, and the thought I had folded down began to unfold against my will. I thanked her and told her to keep digging, to find me the name under the name, the second pair of hands. And I sat alone in Marilyn's room with her letter against my chest, and let the full shape of it settle on me at last. For weeks I had thought of myself as a man being robbed, then as a man being murdered. I had been wrong about the size of it both times. This was not a crime that had happened to me. This was a craft, refined on another man's corpse, and I had married it, and brought it into the house Marilyn built, and handed it my medicine drawer, and my accounts, and my trust. Lorenzo Bruce had been a careful man, too. I was sure of it. A man with a tidy estate and a comfortable life, and not the slightest idea that the warm hand pouring his coffee was counting down his days. He had not been a fool. He had simply been alone, and lonely, and certain that the woman who loved him would never harm him. He had been exactly what I was, and he was ashes now, in an urn somewhere in Illinois, with no autopsy and no justice, and no one who ever knew to look. That was the part that finally hardened the last soft place in me, because if the pattern held, then I knew, almost to the month, how much time I had left. Lorenzo Bruce had lasted 18 months. I was somewhere past 14. The pills had been increasing. The power of attorney had come out of the drawer. They had moved up the schedule, which meant they believed the end was close, which meant it was. I did not have weeks to build a perfect case, the slow and careful way I had always done my best work. I had days, maybe a handful of them, and I was the only man alive who knew that the woman sleeping down the hall had killed before, and was very close to killing again. I looked out at the black water for a long moment. Then I stood up, and I stopped thinking like a victim, and I started thinking like the man who used to catch people like her for a living. It was time to build the trap. A good banker never gambles. He builds the deal so carefully that by the time he signs, he already knows he cannot lose. I had closed 1,000 deals that way. Now I would close the most important one of my life. Except this time, the asset on the table was my own survival, and the counterparty was trying to kill me before I could sign. First, I had to live long enough to win. Noah taught me how. Quietly. I stopped eating anything at home I had not watched, come straight from the pot to every plate. I developed a poor appetite, which an ailing old man is allowed. I took my pills and palmed them when I could, kept up the trembling and the fog so they would believe the slow road still ran on schedule. It was a tightrope. Eat too little, and they would notice. Eat what they gave me, and I would die. I walked it one careful day at a time. Then I built my team. Duncan Lane had been my attorney for 25 years. He had drafted the bank's hardest contracts and buried more clever men in paperwork than I could count. He was 70 now, dry as chalk, with a mind like a bear trap and no warmth to waste. I went to his office downtown, told his assistant it was about my estate, and behind a closed door, I laid the whole thing in front of him. The pill, the poison, Lorenzo Bruce, all of it. Duncan did not gasp either. He simply took off his glasses, cleaned them, and got to work. They are building a record that you are incompetent, he said. So we build the opposite, today, before they file anything. I am going to have you examined by an independent specialist, the best in the state, and have him certify in writing that you are of completely sound mind. The moment that report exists, their entire guardianship play is dead. A court will not declare a man incompetent over a doctor who examined him last week and found him sharp as a tack. He kept going, the strategy assembling itself in his flat voice. We quietly revoke every authority she might claim. We move your assets behind walls she cannot reach without your living signature. We prepare the divorce, the fraud claims, the recovery action. All of it in a sealed drawer. And Wyatt, listen to me. We do not file one page until everything is ready. The day she learns you know is the day you are in real danger. We build it all in the dark, and we spring it at once. It was exactly how I would have done it, for the first time in weeks. I was not alone with the weight of it. 2 days later, Duncan arranged the meeting I needed most. His name was Leroy Ibarra, a detective with the county, a broad, unhurried man in his 50s, with tired eyes that had seen the worst of people and stopped expecting better. He listened to my whole account without a word, then to Amy's findings on Lorenzo Bruce, and when I was done, he rubbed his jaw a long moment. "Mr. Brewer," he said, "I believe you. I want you to hear that first, because most people in my chair would not. But what I believe and what I can charge are two different animals. Right now, you have a private blood test with no legal chain of custody, a pharmacist's word, and an investigator's read on an out-of-state death that nobody ever questioned. A defense lawyer would tear that apart in an afternoon. What do you need?" I asked. "I need the poison proven the right way," he said. "Blood drawn and sealed under proper procedure, so no one can claim it was tampered with. I need to put the substance in someone's hand. A pill swapped on camera, a document forged. Something that ties a living person to the act, not just to the benefit. Get me that, and I can move fast and hard. Until then, my hands are tied. But the moment you have it, you call me, day or night, and I will not be slow." So we set the trap inside the trap, with Leroy guiding us on what would hold up and what would not. I had Noah arrange a proper sealed blood draw under documented conditions. And in the den at home, on a shelf among Marilyn's old books, I placed a small camera no bigger than a button, aimed at the cabinet where my medicines lived. It took only 3 nights. On the 4th morning, I sat in Duncan's office, and the 3 of us watched the footage on a laptop. There was Beckham, alone in my den at 11:30 at night, taking my pill bottle down from the cabinet. He shook the tablets into his palm, counted them, and from a small folded paper added several of his own, then capped the bottle and set it back exactly where it had been. He did it with the bored ease of a man who had done it many times. Leroy exhaled slowly. "That," he said, "is a person tampering with your medication that I can work with." But it was Amy, watching over my shoulder, who caught the other thing. "Look at how they are together," she said quietly, and rewound to a moment Beckham did not know he was being filmed, when Josephine had come to the den door and the 2 of them spoke for a few seconds. Close. Easy. His hand finding the small of her back. Amy froze the frame. "She is 51. Mr. Brewer. He is 32. If she were his mother, she had him at 19, which is possible. But there is no birth record, no school record, nothing anywhere that proves this man is her son, only their word for it." She tapped the frozen image, the hand on the back, the angle of their bodies. "And that," she said, "is not how a son stands next to his mother. A grocery lot the next day, and listen to 2 people discuss me like a debt about to come due." Leroy had been plain about it. Audio of a conversation I was not part of would not win a courtroom, not in this state. But it would tell us everything, he said. And everything it told us, he could then go and prove the right way. So I hid the little device in the sunroom, the glassed-in porch off the back of the house, where Josephine took her evening wine and thought herself alone with her son who was not her son. It ran for 2 nights, On the third, I took it out, drove into town, and pressed play. For a while it was nothing. Wine being poured, television. Then her voice, low and relaxed, in a tone I had never once heard her use to my face. "The brokerage is down to the bonds now," she said. "Once those clear, that's most of it. The house we can't touch until after. But after is the whole point. After." I knew what after meant. "Then Beckham. How much is the policy again?" "2 million, she said. And I heard ice clink in her glass. "Double for accidental. But we don't need cute. The heart does it on its own. Clean. Expected. No questions. His own doctor's been writing decline in that chart for half a year. Nobody autopsies a sad old man with a bad ticker. $2 million. A life insurance policy I had no memory of taking, which meant it was one more thing signed on a foggy morning while a soft hand guided my pen. They were not only emptying what I had, they had wagered on my death itself. And the bet paid $2 million when my heart finally gave out on the schedule they were setting. Then Beckham laughed, and the sound of it turned my stomach. "You should have seen him at supper," he said. I asked if he remembered our anniversary trip, and he just smiled and nodded, terrified to admit he couldn't, because there was no trip. He'll agree to anything now. Honestly, I almost feel bad. He's so grateful. He thinks you hung the moon. "He hung the bank," Josephine said. And they both laughed, easy and warm. Two people enjoying a private joke at the expense of the fool who paid for the wine they were drinking. He's the easiest one yet. The first husband fought the paperwork to the end. This one signs whatever I slide across the table and thanks me for it. The easiest one yet. The first husband. There it was, said out loud and unguarded. The confirmation that Lorenzo Bruce had not been the only one before me, that I was simply the latest in a line of men charmed and drained and buried. But it was the next thing she said that stopped my breath. I knew the day I read about her. Josephine went on, quieter now, almost fond of her own cleverness. The wife, the obituary, long illness, devoted husband, the whole picture. A man like that, about to be alone with all that money and all that loyalty and nowhere to put it. I had him picked out before they'd even finished the funeral flowers. The hard part wasn't getting him. The hard part was waiting the right amount of time to look like an accident. I sat in that parking lot with the engine ticking and the rain starting on the windshield, and I felt the floor of my own life drop away. It had not been fate on that terrace. It had not even been a hunter spotting prey by chance at a charity dinner. She had read about Marilyn's death in the paper. She had marked me while my wife was still warm in the ground, studied me, learned the shape of my grief and my fortune, and then arranged, somehow, to be standing at that rail in dark blue when the lonely banker came outside for air. Every soft word, every listening silence, every gift of feeling chosen again. All of it built on a plan that began with my wife's obituary. I had thought the cruelest thing was the poison. I had been wrong about that too. Then Beckham's voice, low, with that intimacy underneath, that no longer pretended to be anything else. "So how much longer?" "Weeks," she said. "Maybe less, if I move the dose up. And then it's done. And we take the money, and we go somewhere warm. Just us. Like always. Just us. Like always. Not a mother and a son. Two partners closing the books on another mark. Planning the beach they would lie on while I lay in the ground. I turned the recorder off. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I had passed through rage and out the other side into something colder and more useful. I had their voices now, the money, the policy, the timeline, the contempt, the partnership they no longer bothered to hide. Leroy could take every fact in that recording and go nail it down the proper way. The way that holds, it was a weapon, and a sharp one, but it was that one line that I could not put down. The line about the obituary, the line that meant the lie was older and deeper than I had ever imagined. She had said it lightly, as a small boast. I knew. Though, the way I knew when a clean-looking ledger was hiding a second set of books, that there was more underneath it. A plan that careful, that patient, that began the very week Marilyn died, was not the work of a woman acting on a whim. Someone had helped her choose me, and I was going to find out exactly how long they had been watching my family before they decided to destroy it. Before you strike, you close every door the money can leak out of. A man cannot fight a war if the enemy is still draining his treasury behind his back. So while Leroy built his criminal case in the dark, and Amy hunted the truth about Beckham, I went to work doing the one thing I had done better than anyone alive. I protected the money. The hard part was doing it without her seeing. Any clumsy move, a frozen account she tried to use, a beneficiary letter that crossed her desk, and she would know the fool had woken up, and she would move the dose up and finish me before the wall was done. Everything had to happen quietly, in channels she never touched, invisible until the day it slammed shut. Barrett and Amy laid the full picture across Duncan's conference table. And even I, who had expected the worst, felt the cold of it. Over 14 months, they had moved more than $400,000 out of my accounts, drained patiently through those layered shell companies, so no single transfer ever looked alarming. There were 6 forged authorizations, my own shaky signature pulled from foggy mornings, each one moving another piece. And there was the policy. $2 million in life insurance, taken out 8 months ago. Premiums paid from my own account. With Josephine Chase named as the sole beneficiary, she had not married a man. She had opened an account and scheduled its closing. Duncan went through it like a surgeon laying out instruments. First, he said, the power of attorney is dead on arrival. You never signed it. And we now have your competency certified by a specialist who will testify you are sharper than half my partners. Second, we revoke every authority, every joint access, every door. Third, we redraft your will and your trust today, and we move the beneficiary of that insurance policy where it belongs. Where does it belong? I asked. Though I already knew. To your children, he said. Thea and Otis. Every dollar. That was the moment something in my chest eased for the first time since the dock, because the trust on that table wasn't only mine. Marilyn and I had built it together, dollar by dollar, across 40 years. The church suppers and the careful saving, and the small house that became a larger one. It held what was left of the life we made. And that woman down the hall had been quietly carving it up to fund a beach somewhere with the man she called her son. While my own children, the children Marilyn and I raised, had been cut out and pushed away by my own foolish hand. Now I put them back. I sat at Duncan's table and signed a new will, a real one, in my own clear name on a clear morning, leaving everything to Thea and Otis and not 1 cent to Josephine. I redirected the insurance to them. I named Otis, my son in sawdust, as the one to act for me if I could not act for myself, in place of the wife who had been counting the days until I could not. Marilyn would have wanted her children to have it. I had been 3 years too slow to see it, and I would not be slow again. When the last page was signed, Duncan capped his pen and looked at me over his glasses. The wall is up, he said. As of this minute, every asset you have left is behind it. They can keep stealing the bonds for another day or two. But the house, the trust, the policy, the bulk of it, is locked. Whatever happens now, they don't walk away rich. He paused. We are close. Wyatt. Once Leroy has what he needs, we end this. I drove home that evening lighter than I had any right to feel. A poisoned man with a knot of fear still living under my ribs, but a man who had finally gotten his hands back on the wheel. The money was safe. My children were protected. The trap was nearly built. For the first time, I let myself believe I might actually live to see them answer for it. I had pulled into my own drive and shut off the engine when my phone rang. Amy Webb. I almost didn't pick up. I wanted one quiet minute. Then I saw the time, nearly 9 at night, and I knew Amy did not call at 9 to tell me things were fine. I answered. She did not say hello. "Wyatt," she said, and her voice had a strange flatness to it, the sound of a person choosing her words with great care. I finished going through Beckham Bennett. I have been at this 20 years. And I have to be honest with you. I have never pulled a thread quite like this one. "Are you somewhere you can sit down?" I told her I was in my truck. "Good," she said. "Stay there. Don't go inside the house yet. Because what I'm about to tell you changes what that man is. And once you know it, you are not going to be able to look at either of them the same way. And I need you to hear it before you walk back through that door and have to keep pretending." I gripped the wheel and stared at the warm yellow windows of my own house, where my wife and the man she called her son were moving behind the glass, setting the table, playing their parts. "Tell me," I said, and Amy told me who Beckham Bennett really was. Every number in this thing had fit. The transfers, the dates, the dose, the policy. All of it balanced like a ledger that finally closed. Only one piece had never fit, and it was not a number. It was a person. And when a person does not fit, the whole picture changes meaning. On the phone, in my dark truck the night before, Amy had told me the headline and no more. "He is not her son," she had said. And it is worse than that. And I will not give you the rest over a phone line while you are sitting 20 feet from both of them. Go inside. Be the fool one more night. Come to my office in the morning and I will show you everything. It was the longest night of my life. I sat at supper across from the two of them and smiled and trembled and let Josephine cut my meat. And the whole time the word Amy had used circled in me like a shark under ice. Not her son. I slept perhaps an hour. At first light, I drove to Green Bay. Amy had the whole wall of her office covered when I walked in. Papers and printouts taped up in rows, lines drawn between them in red marker. She did not waste time. "Start with what isn't there," she said. "I told you there was no birth record making Beckham her son. Now I can tell you why. There is no record of Beckham Bennett being anyone's son, because Beckham Bennett barely exists either. The name is about 5 years old, same as hers. They were both born on paper at almost the same moment." She tapped a cluster of documents. "So I stopped looking for a mother and a son," she said. "And I started looking for 2 people. And the second I did that, they were everywhere. A truck titled to both of them. A storage unit they rented together 4 years ago. A phone plan with 2 lines on one account. A little house in Iowa they bought and flipped, jointly. The year before either of these names existed. Mr. Brewer. These two have been financially braided together for years, side by side, equal. That is not a parent and a child. A parent and a child do not co-sign a mortgage at 28 and 47. I stood there, looking at the red lines, and the careful structure I had built to understand my own ruin quietly rearranged itself into something far uglier. But here is where my stomach dropped. Amy went on, and she pulled down a single sheet and held it up. I told you there was a second pair of hands in the Lorenzo Bruce death. The man who happened to be around in those months. The one who helped her. The one nobody could put a face to. She paused. I found him. Same height. Same description. Different name back then. But the same Iowa storage unit shows up in both lives. It was him. It was Beckham. He was there for Lorenzo Bruce. The room seemed to tilt the way the dock had tilted. The two of them did not just run this on me, she said quietly. They ran it on Lorenzo too. Together. The pattern you and I found. The older man. The heart. The clean death. The disappearing widow. That was never one woman working alone. It was always the two of them. A team. She finds the lonely rich man and marries him. He stays close. The helpful younger relative. The one who handles the parts she can't. And when it's done, they take the money and vanish and surface somewhere new with fresh names, as mother and son, and do it all again. Everything I had seen with my own eyes turned over and showed its other face. The two of them bent close in my kitchen, going silent when I came in. The hand at the small of her back in my den. The boathouse in the dark, his voice saying we've done this before. Her voice on the recording. Just us. Like always. Somewhere warm. I had kept telling myself there was an innocent shape to it. A close mother. A devoted son. There never had been. I had been living inside their performance, the only person in the house who did not know the play. How long? I asked. My voice did not sound like mine. How long have these two been together? Years, Amy said. Long before me, long before you, long before Lorenzo. I can't give you the wedding date because I don't think there's a real one. But everything I have says these are not relatives at all. They came into your home wearing the one disguise that lets a man and a woman move through your life without you ever once suspecting what they are to each other. I had to sit down then. I lowered myself into the chair across from her desk, an old man in a quiet office in Green Bay, finally seeing the whole shape of the thing that had been eating my life. Amy watched me a moment. Then she said, "There's one more piece. The piece that means none of this is guesswork anymore. The piece that no judge, no jury, no defense lawyer could explain away. I wasn't sure I'd find it. But I did." She turned her laptop slowly around to face me. "I want you to look at this," she said, very gently. "And I'm sorry. Wyatt, I'm sorry you have to be the one to see it." I leaned forward toward the screen, and I saw what was on it. I had spent my life preparing for every answer. I had sat across from men who lied for a living and known the lie before they finished the sentence. I thought there was nothing left in this world that could truly take me by surprise. I was wrong. I had prepared for every answer, except this one. On the screen was a photograph, old, by the look of it. The colors a little faded, the clothes from another decade. A young man and a younger woman on a beach somewhere bright, his arms wrapped around her from behind, her head tipped back against his shoulder. Both of them laughing into the camera with the easy, shameless joy of people who belong to each other. He was kissing the side of her face. Her hand was over his where it rested on her waist, and on that hand was a ring. It was them, younger, freer, before the gray and the careful manners and the two false names, but unmistakably them. Josephine, Beckham, not a mother holding her boy, a man and a woman in love. "I found this under their real names," Amy said quietly. "From years ago, long before either of them became a Chase or a Bennett. They were a couple then. Wyatt. They have been a couple the whole time. The mother and the son who walked into your house and your marriage have been lovers since before your wife was even sick." I sat very still and looked at that photograph, and one by one, Every moment of the last 2 years turned over in my mind and showed me its true face. The woman who had stood at the rail in dark blue and made me feel chosen had been choosing a mark. The wedding I had been so proud of, the vows, the ring, the promise of not dying alone. All of it had been a transaction, a contract to take everything I owned and then take my life. And the helpful young man who fixed my gutters and drove me to my doctor and called me Wyatt with that easy grin. He had not been my stepson. He had been her lover, living under my roof, sleeping in a room down the hall from the bed they had arranged for her to share with me. They had lain in my house and laughed at me, the two of them, the way you laugh at a slow animal walking into a snare. Every tender moment she had ever given me, she had given me while he waited in the next room. Every night I had reached for my wife. She had been counting the days until she could go back to him for good. With my money and my death certificate in her purse, I thought I had felt the bottom of this thing. I had not. This was the bottom, not the theft, not even the poison. This, the total emptiness of it. There had never been one real moment. Not one. From the obituary to the beach they planned to lie on, it had all been theater. And I had been the only man in the house who did not know he was on a stage. And they had done it before. To Lorenzo Bruce, the same two faces, the same warm performance, the same patient murder, and an old man dead and burned with no one ever the wiser. How many beaches had they lain on, laughing, paid for, by how many dead and trusting men? I was simply the next name on a list that had no end, because no one had ever lived long enough to write it down. I waited for the grief to break me. I waited for the humiliation to fold me in half, the shame of the fool who had married his own murder and brought it home to the house his good wife built. It didn't come. Something else came instead. The rage I had felt before, hot and useless, had burned all the way down. And what was left underneath it was cold and clear and absolutely steady. I had felt it once or twice in 40 years, in the worst rooms of my career. The moment when the panic finally stopped and the mind simply went to work. I felt it now, looking at that photograph of the two people who had decided to erase me. These were not a mother and a son. I said it out loud, quietly, in Amy's small office, so that I would never again let myself believe otherwise. These are two predators who hunt lonely old men for a living, and I am their prey. But I am the first prey who ever saw them coming. Amy was watching me carefully, the way you watch a man you are not sure of. "Wyatt," she said, "what do you want to do?" I looked at the wall of red lines, at the whole shape of it laid bare. I had everything now. I had the poison in my blood, drawn and sealed the proper way. I had Beckham on film tampering with my pills. I had their own voices on the recording. The money, the policy, the schedule, the contempt. I had Lorenzo Bruce and a pattern that proved this was not a crime, but a trade. And now I had the one truth that turned their whole disguise into a weapon I could put in their hands. The truth that they were never what they claimed to be at all. For 6 months they had built a careful machine to bury me quietly and walk away rich and free, as they had walked away from every man before me. They were not going to walk away this time. I stood up from the chair, and I felt 30 years younger. And I felt like the man who used to catch people exactly like them and put them where they belonged. It is time, I told Amy, to bring everyone together. We have a trap to spring, alone. I was just an old man with a bad heart and a house full of people trying to kill him. But I had never once in my life planned to go to war alone. The best thing a leader ever learns is that he is only as strong as the people he gathers around the table. so I gathered mine. We met 2 evenings later in Duncan's conference room downtown, after the building had emptied, the blinds drawn against the dark, Duncan at the head with his files, Barrett beside him with the money laid out in columns, Leroy in the corner, arms folded, Amy with her wall of red lines copied into a binder, Noah with the sealed lab reports, even Ella, who had taken a taxi all the way from the peninsula and sat with her purse in her lap and her chin lifted, ready at last to say the thing she had swallowed on the dock that first morning. And my children. Otis came in first, and behind him, for the first time in 2 years, came Thea. She stopped just inside the door when she saw me. My daughter, 41 years old, with her mother's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn chin, the one who had pulled me aside at my wedding with tears running down her face and begged me to wait, and whom I had called jealous and turned away from. We looked at each other across that room full of strangers, and I watched the anger and the fear and the love war in her face, the same war I had put there. "I am so sorry," I said. "It was all I had. You were right, both of you, and I was too proud and too lonely to listen, and it nearly cost me my life. I do not deserve it. But I am asking you to forgive me." Thea crossed the room and put her arms around me. Hard, the way she had when she was small, and I felt her shaking. And I held my daughter and did not let go for a long time. Over her shoulder, Otis stood with his jaw tight and his eyes wet, and Ella was dabbing at hers with a handkerchief. And for a moment the case and the trap and the poison all fell away, and there was only this, a family stitching itself back together in a borrowed room. Then I told them everything, the whole of it, the parts I had spared Otis at the tavern, the pill, the poison in my blood, the $2 million policy, Lorenzo Bruce, dead and burned in Illinois, and the photograph, the beach, the truth that the mother and son were lovers who hunted men like me for a living. I watched it land on my children, the horror of it, the understanding that they had nearly lost their father to a murder dressed up as old age. Thea pressed a hand to her mouth. Otis stood and walked to the window and stood there breathing for a moment, his big builder's hands curling into fists. And when he turned back, his voice was rough. "We almost buried you," he said. "We almost stood at your grave and never knew. But you do know," I said. "And because you know, they will not get away with it." Then we went around the table, and one by one they laid down what they had brought. Noah spoke first, plain and clinical. Sealed blood, drawn under proper conditions, showing the poison and its concentration. I will testify to exactly what it is and exactly what it was doing to him. Barrett next. Over 400,000 moved through shells, 6 forged authorizations. The policy with her named, every dollar traced, every signature provably pulled from a man too drugged to read. Amy, their real identities, their years together, the Iowa house, and Beckham placed at the Lorenzo Bruce death. A pattern, not an accident. A trade. Then Leroy unfolded his arms and spoke for the first time, and the room went still. "I have a man on film tampering with this gentleman's medication," he said. "I have a poison in his blood, drawn the right way. I have a prior death that suddenly looks very different. And I have 2 people operating under stolen lives." He looked at me. "That is no longer a suspicion, Mr. Brewer. That is an arrest. Maybe 2. And Ella, last, set her purse aside and said quietly, 'I have what I saw. The whispering that stopped when he came in the room. The way she watched him take his pills. The day on the dock, I knew something was wrong and was too afraid to say it. She looked at me, her old eyes steady. I will not be too afraid anymore. We built the plan in that room, brick by brick. Duncan would have the divorce, the fraud suits, and the recovery action drawn and ready to serve. Leroy would coordinate the arrest with the county, and I would be there, in my own home, when it happened. I had earned that. I wanted to look at the two of them with my own eyes when the disguise came off, and they finally understood that the slow old fool had seen them coming all along. We set it for 3 days out. Everything would land at once, the way Duncan and I both believed it must. All the doors closing in the same instant so neither of them could run. The meeting broke near midnight. My children walked me to my truck, one on each side, the way you walk an old man, except I had never felt less like one. I had my family back. I had an army. In 3 days it would be over. Then Amy caught my arm in the dark parking lot. "Wyatt," she said, "hang back a second. I didn't want to put this in front of everyone. Not yet. But I pulled one last thread today. About how they chose you. About when this really started." She held up a thin folder. "And it isn't what any of us thought. You need to see when they actually began watching your family. I thought by now I had measured the full depth of their cruelty. The poison, the policy, the laughter. The two of them lying in my house as lovers, while I called one of them my wife. I thought I had seen the bottom. Amy's last folder taught me that there was a floor beneath the floor. We sat in my truck under a street lamp while she opened it. Inside were copies of pages Leroy had pulled from a storage unit in Iowa, the one she and Beckham had kept under their real names. Notes. Lists. And on me, there was a page with my name at the top. My net worth estimated to the dollar. The bank. The value of the house. Even the trust. There were notes on my routines, the charity boards, the hospital foundation. There was a printout of an old newspaper photo, the bank's anniversary gala, Marilyn and me side by side in our good clothes, and the dates. "Wyatt," Amy said softly. "Look at the dates." I looked. The earliest notes were from 1.5 years before Marilyn died. Before, while my wife was still alive. While I was driving her to her treatments and sitting up with her through the bad nights and praying to a God I was not sure I believed in. These two had already opened a file on me. They had been watching our family the way they watched a stock they meant to buy, pricing the house, counting the accounts, marking the husband who would soon be alone and rich and broken. The obituary Josephine had boasted about was not the beginning. It was the starting gun. They had been circling for 1.5 years, waiting for my wife to die so the hunt could begin. For one terrible moment, a thought rose up that I could not bear. I made myself look straight at it. Had they touched her too? Had they reached into Marilyn's illness somehow? No. I held on to what I knew. Marilyn's illness had been real and long, and watched over by doctors who loved her. Years of it. Nothing sudden. Nothing they could have caused. They had not killed my wife. They had simply stood in the shadows at the edge of her dying and counted the days until they could move in on what she left behind. That was the truth, and it was its own kind of horror. They had looked at the worst thing that ever happened to me and seen an opportunity. It had never been chance. Not the terrace, not the dark blue dress, not the late husband she happened to mention, not 1 second of any of it. She had known the layout of my grief before she ever spoke my name, because she had studied it for 18 months. The whole of it, the marriage, the love, the second chance, had been a long con run on a dying man's family, set in motion while my wife still drew breath. I closed the folder. When I spoke, My voice was very quiet and very steady. "This is the last piece." I said, "Now we have all of it. The poison, the money, the policy, Lorenzo, who they really are, and proof they planned this before Marilyn was even gone. There is nothing left to find." He paused, the old commander in me taking the chair. "We do not wait 3 days. We move now, while the wall is up and they suspect nothing. Tell Duncan and Leroy. We end it." Amy looked at me a long moment, then nodded once. "We end it," she said. The machinery turned that night and into the next morning. Quiet and unstoppable. Duncan finalized the petitions, the divorce, the fraud action, the recovery suit, and had a process server standing by. Leroy took the sealed blood, the tampering footage, the financial trail, the Lorenzo file, and the stolen identities to a judge before breakfast. And by mid-morning, he had what he needed. The competency certificate sat in Duncan's drawer, ready to make a joke of any claim that I did not know my own mind. And the wall did its work. Just after 10 that morning, while I sat in Duncan's office gathering myself for what came next, my phone buzzed with a message from Josephine, then another, then a third. The bank had flagged the last attempted transfer of my bonds and frozen the account. She did not know I had built that freeze. She only knew that money which had moved so easily for 14 months had suddenly stopped moving, and that a tightness had entered the floor of her perfect plan. "Everything all right with your accounts? Darling." The last message read, the false sweetness stretched thin over something sharper. "The bank is being difficult. Call me when you can." I read it twice and felt nothing but the cold, clear steadiness of a man watching a trap close exactly as he designed it. For the first time in 2 years, she was the one who did not understand what was happening. For the first time, she was afraid. I did not answer. Let her wonder. Let her feel. For one morning, the ground move under her the way it had moved under me on that dock, the way it had moved under Lorenzo Bruce, the way it had moved under every man whose name was never written down. I stood and put on my coat. Duncan and Leroy were ready. The papers were drawn. The warrant was signed. The wall was sealed. My family was safe. And a poisoned old banker had built, brick by careful brick, the one thing these two had never once faced in all their years of hunting. A mark who saw them coming, and lived, and prepared. There was only one thing left to do, and I meant to do it in person, in the house Marilyn built, looking into their eyes, tomorrow morning. I would go home, and I would take their masks off. All my life, I kept my voice steady in rooms where people were losing millions of dollars. The trick is never the volume. The trick is to be the calmest person in the room, because the calmest person is the one who already knows how it ends. I walked into my own kitchen that morning, knowing exactly how it ended. And I had never been calmer in my life. Leroy and 2 deputies waited in the front room, out of sight. Duncan stood in the hall with the papers. Thea and Otis were in a car at the end of the drive, and I came in alone. The way I had asked to do the one thing no one could do for me. Josephine was at the counter, the phone in her hand, the strain finally showing through the lovely surface. "There you are," she said, too quickly. "Wyatt, the bank has frozen everything. I have been calling and calling. I think someone has made a terrible mistake with our accounts." Beckham leaned in the doorway, watching me, and for the first time there was a wariness in his easy face. I set my keys on the counter, and then I stopped trembling. I let it fall away. All of it. The shake in the hands, the fog in the eyes, the small lost voice of the man they thought they owned. I straightened my back. I looked my wife full in the face with 2 clear eyes, and I watched her understand, in the space of a breath, that the old fool she had been poisoning for 14 months was not in this room and never really had been. "No mistake," I said. My voice was low and even and entirely my own. I froze those accounts. "Josephine, I have been freezing doors all over your little plan for weeks. You just could not see me doing it, because you were so certain there was nothing left of me to see." The color went out of her face. Beckham came off the doorframe. "Let me show you what I know," I said, and I began to lay it down, one piece at a time, the way I once laid out a fraud for a board that did not want to believe it. I know about the pill. I had one tested. It is not my heart medicine. It is poison, and there is more of it in my blood, drawn and sealed by a doctor who will testify. I know it was not only the pills, that you have been putting it in my food. I have Beckham on film, in my own den, opening my bottle and adding to it. I have every dollar you moved, 400,000 and more, through every shell company, and 6 forged signatures you pulled off me on the mornings you made sure I could not think. I have the $2 million policy with your name on it. Each sentence landed like a stone in still water. Josephine's mouth opened and shut. "Don't," I said quietly, before she could speak, and she stopped. "I know about Lorenzo Bruce." I said, "The man in Illinois, the same age, the same heart, the same dizzy decline, the same quick cremation, the same grieving widow who inherited everything and disappeared. I know he was not the only one, and I know he was not your husband to mourn, because I know who you really are." I took out the photograph and set it on the counter between us. The beach, the laughing young couple, the ring on her hand under his. "You are not his mother," I said. "You never were. The 2 of you have been together for years, and you walk into lonely men's lives wearing the one disguise that keeps anyone from looking twice. You did it to Lorenzo. You did it to me. And you marked me, Josephine, a year and a half before my wife was even in the ground. You sat in the shadows and watched a good woman die and priced her husband like a house going up for sale. Beckham bolted for the back door. He got it open. Leroy was already there, filling the frame, and the deputies came in from the front, and the kitchen that had held so many of their quiet, smiling lies was suddenly full of the law. Josephine did not run. There was nowhere left, and she knew it. I watched the warmth and the softness and the lovely practiced grief drain out of her face entirely, and what was left underneath was something flat and cold and very old, the true face that had been there the whole time, behind the dark blue dress, behind every tender word. Duncan stepped in and laid the papers on the counter beside the photograph. "Mrs. Brewer," he said, "you are served. Dissolution of marriage, a civil action for fraud, and recovery of every dollar." And Leroy took her wrists and read her the words and told her she was under arrest for the attempted murder of Wyatt Brewer and for what had been done to a man named Lorenzo Bruce. She looked at me then, and there was no pleading in it, no tears, no last performance. There was only hatred, pure and bottomless. The look of a predator that has finally been caught in its own snare after a lifetime of walking free. "You were supposed to be easy," she said, very low, "just for me." I held her gaze. I said, "For a while. You simply forgot to ask what I did for a living." They took her out my front door into the gray morning, past the dock where she had loosened the screws, past the windows of the house Marilyn built, and I stood in my kitchen, an old man with a poisoned heart and a steady hand, and I watched the woman who had come to bury me go down my own driveway in handcuffs. It was not joy I felt. It was something quieter and far heavier. It was justice. And it had cost more than anyone would ever know. Justice came that gray morning in the back of a county car. But the thing that finally healed me came from a woman who had been gone 3 years. The weeks after the arrest moved fast. With the sealed blood, the footage, the financial trail, and their own recorded voices. The case against them was not a case at all, so much as an avalanche. Their real names came out, the ones Amy had dug from under the lies. And once the names were public, the rest came with them. There had been others. Not only Lorenzo Bruce, a widower in Ohio, a retired doctor in Missouri, old men with weak hearts and full accounts who had died quietly and been mourned by a loving young wife and her devoted son. Detectives in 3 states began pulling those files back open, and for the first time, families who had buried a father without a single question began to get answers. Josephine and Beckham would not lie on a warm beach with my money. They would spend what was left of their lives in courtrooms and cells. And the line of the dead behind them, the names no one had ever thought to write down, would finally be spoken aloud. My own body began to climb back toward the light. Without the poison, the fog lifted, the dizziness faded. Within a month, my mind was as clear as it had been in years. Clear enough to know, with a kind of awe, how close I had come. Duncan recovered most of the stolen money. The house was mine. The trust was mine. And it was all promised. Every dollar of it. To my children. The way it should have been from the start. But it was the house itself that changed most. For 2 years, it had been a stage, full of smiling lies. Now, it was simply a home again. Thea came up on weekends and filled the kitchen with noise. Otis fixed the loose board on the dock with his own hands, and we stood out there afterward in the cold and did not say much, which between us has always been the truest kind of talk. Ella stayed on, and there was no more whispering that stopped when I entered a room, only the ordinary good quiet of people who have nothing to hide. And one evening, when the worst was over and the house had gone still, I climbed the stairs to Marilyn's room, and I took the letter out of the drawer where I had finally let it rest, and I sat in her window seat over the dark water. And at last I opened it. Her handwriting filled 2 pages, the careful schoolteacher script grown a little shaky near the end. She had written it in her last weeks, knowing she was leaving. Thinking of me, my dear Wyatt, it began. By the time you read this, I will be gone, and I know exactly how you will take it, because I have known you 40 years. You will go quiet. You will work too hard. You will stand in this house and let the silence convince you that your life is over. So I am writing to argue with you one last time. Do not be alone, my love. You were never any good at being alone. But hear me, because this is the important part. There is a difference between not being alone and not being lonely. And a lonely man will mistake the first for the second and walk straight into trouble. You were always so careful with everything. The money, the house, the children's futures. You were careful with everything except your own heart. Be careful with that too. Whatever comes, let Thea and Otis carry you. They are stubborn and they are good, and they love you more than they will ever say. The way you love them. Do not let your pride put them out in the cold. They are the best thing we ever made. Better than the house. Better than any of it. And know this, the life we built was real. Every day of it. Hold on to that. And you will be all right. I love you. Go on living. Marilyn. I sat there for a long time with my dead wife's voice in my hands, and I wept the way a man weeps only a few times in his life, because she had seen it. Not the poison, not the woman in the dark blue dress. None of that. She had seen me. She had known, 3 years before it happened, exactly how my loneliness would betray me, and she had tried to reach across death itself to warn me, and I'd been too afraid of my own grief to open the envelope and let her. Every word she wrote had come true. I had gone quiet. I had let the silence convince me. I had been careless with my own heart, and I had put my children out in the cold, and a predator had walked straight into the gap her death left behind. But she had also told me the way home, and in the end, without knowing it, I had found it. I had let Thea and Otis carry me. I had let them back in. The best thing we ever made had saved my life. When I came downstairs, my children were in the kitchen, the lamps lit, the kettle on. Thea looked up at my face and knew at once that I had read it, and she did not ask. She only came and put her arms around me, and Otis put a hand on my shoulder, and the 3 of us stood there in the warm light of the house their mother built. The peace was coming back. I could feel it returning to the rooms like heat to a cold house. But I knew, standing there, that peace like that is never free, and I had paid more for it than I had ever paid for anything in my life. A few months later, I stood at the end of my dock in the spring sun, and I finally understood what justice truly costs. The peninsula had thawed, the birches were going green again, and the lake had lost its winter steel and turned the soft blue it wears from May to October. Otis had rebuilt the dock stairs that winter, every board, every screw set true with his own hands, and they were solid under my feet, in a way the old ones never were again after I learned what had been done to them. I stood where I had nearly fallen to my death, and I wasn't afraid, and that felt like its own small miracle. I had paid a great deal for this quiet morning. I want to be honest with you about that, because it would be a lie to tell you the bad man simply wins in the end and walks away whole. I lost 2 years of my life to a performance. I lost the easy trust I once gave people, the warm assumption that a kind face means a kind heart. For a long while, I lost the ability to sit in my own home without listening for footsteps. Those things do not come all the way back. A man who has been hunted carries it in him forever, but here is what I gained, and it was worth the price. I got my life, plainly and literally. I got my health, my clear mind, the bonds and the house and the work of 40 years, kept safe for the children it always should have gone to. And I got back the 2 people I had pushed out into the cold, my Thea and my Otis. The best thing Marilyn and I ever made. We do not waste time anymore. The 3 of us. We learned how quickly it can all be taken. Most of all, I got back something I did not know I had lost. My own respect. For 2 years I let myself be small, vague, grateful, fading, becoming that man again, even as a disguise, was the hardest thing I ever did. And walking back out of it taught me something I should have known all along. What those 2 did to me was never the measure of my worth. The measure was what I chose to do about it. So if you have stayed with me to the end of this story, let me leave you with what it cost me to learn. Trust people. Life is poorer if you don't. But trust the way a banker lends, with your eyes open and the books in front of you. Because love and verification are not enemies. The people who truly love you will never mind being checked on. Only the ones with something to hide are insulted by the question. And guard against loneliness, because loneliness is the open gate. It was not foolishness that nearly killed me. I was not a foolish man. It was grief, and the silence of an empty house, and the human ache to feel chosen one more time before the end. That ache is not weakness. It is being alive. but a predator can smell it, and a lonely heart will talk itself past 100 warnings. So, when the people who love you, your children, your old friends, tell you something is wrong, do not let your pride wave them off. Pride put my own son out in the cold for 2 years. It very nearly buried me. Let them in. They may be the ones who save your life. My late wife told me there is a difference between not being alone and not being lonely. I learned it the hard way, so that maybe you won't have to. I am genuinely grateful you came this far with me. This kind of story only matters if it stays with someone after the screen goes dark. So let me ask you the same thing I asked at the beginning. Have you ever felt, deep in your gut, that something close to you was wrong long before you could prove it? Did you listen to that feeling, or did you talk yourself out of it? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and your stories teach me as much as mine could ever teach you. If this one moved you, or made you want to call someone you love and really listen to them, I would be honored if you subscribed, so you can sit with me again the next time we have a story worth telling. One last word, the same one I gave you at the start. This has been a work of fiction, the names and events imagined for the telling. But the loneliness in it is real, and the love in it is real, and the warning in it is as real as anything I know. If even one person watches an old parent a little more closely tonight, or answers a child's worried phone call instead of brushing it aside, then Wyatt Brewer did not go through any of this for nothing. The sun was warm on my face. Out past the point, the lighthouse stood white against the blue. The same view Marilyn and I bought this house for half a lifetime ago. Behind me, up the green slope, I could hear Thea laughing at something in the kitchen, and Otis answering her, and Ella calling them both to lunch. I was 67 years old now. I had been robbed and poisoned and lied to by the person who shared my bed. And I had survived all of it with my name and my family and my self-respect intact. The rest of my life was still mine. Every day of it. And I meant to live it with my eyes wide open and the people I loved close by. I took one last look at the water. Then I turned, and I walked up the dock my son had built, toward the warm noise of the house. And I went home,